life is full of the unexpected. True strength does not always come from money, power, or fame, but from the quiet act of watching and the simplicity of love. People may look down on a servant, a maid, or someone thought to have no voice. Yet it is often they, with patience and a heart that listens, who achieve what no expert can. Some wounds cannot be healed with medicine, but they can be soothed by presence. Some silences that feel hopeless can become the beginning of new hope. In those fragile moments, we realize love does not need to be loud, only steady and true. If you too believe small acts can spark great change, like this video, if you have lived or witnessed a moment where quiet care changed everything, share it in the comments, for your story may give strength to someone else. Do not forget to subscribe so you never miss the next inspiring story. Tell us where in the world you are watching from, because perhaps someone near you is listening to this same story right now. Love does not choose a place, does not distinguish color, and it never fades. It only needs a heart brave enough to give. The cries of infants split the night in Newport Beach. Inside the grand Caldwell estate, once the pride of a financial empire, the sound echoed through marble walls and across cold stone floors like an endless curse. 6 cries, 6 pains, 6 blades cutting into the heart of a man once deemed invincible. Adrian Caldwell, 36, stood beneath the crystal chandelier, his shadow long and unsteady. His green eyes, once feared by rivals, were hollow and red from sleepless nights. 6 months earlier, these hands had held Sophia's in the delivery room. Now she was gone, leaving 6 newborns and a father drowning in despair. "We have tried everything, sir." The voice was sharp. Margaret Hale, the longtime housekeeper, stood with silver hair pinned tight, posture rigid. Her gray-blue eyes, once gentle, now showed only endurance and hidden ambition. "The nurses have failed. Dr. Patel says the children are healthy, but perhaps what is missing is something money cannot buy." Adrian's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. "What are you saying?" Margaret held back. The word mother was too cruel a blade, yet in her gaze flickered a secret fire, the hope that one day he would need her, see her as Sophia's replacement. Adrian clenched his jaw. For 6 months he had hired the best: nurses, therapists, hypnotists. Millions spent had bought nothing but hours of restless sleep. Still, every night the mansion filled with wails that tore at his pride. He stormed upstairs, each step striking the Persian carpet like a hammer. The cries grew louder, mixing with sour milk, medicine, and damp towels. He shoved open the nursery door. 6 cribs circled the room, none with rest. Red faces wet with tears, limbs thrashing. The night nurse stumbled, calming one only to wake another. Bottles and cloths littered the floor. Adrian lifted Ethan, the child with Sophia's eyes. Ethan screamed hoarse, his face purple. Adrian tried to soothe him, but his hands shook. He, who once moved markets, could not calm his own son. "Mr. Caldwell," a nurse pleaded, "please, let us handle this. You need rest." He set Ethan back in the crib, eyes hollow, and left. The cries chased him like chains. If Sophia were alive, what would she think of his helplessness? In the hall, Margaret waited, her eyes heavy with pity and calculation. She believed her moment would come, that Adrian would lean on her. But tonight, something else stirred. From the far corridor came a sound, a song, faint, hesitant, yet weaving through the thick cries. The melody was soft, like fresh air entering a suffocating room. Adrian froze, his hand on the railing. His heartbeat slowed. It was not a nurse's voice, nor Margaret's. It was young, fragile, yet carried strange strength, like a flame burning in a storm. He frowned, listening. The song did not drown the cries, but blended with them gently, as if cradling each small soul. For a fleeting moment, the wails paused, just enough for him to believe something had shifted. He did not yet know whose voice it was or why it could reach the children. But in a house buried under despair, a crack had opened. A crack that might lead to salvation, or to a storm powerful enough to break all that he once believed was order. The soft sound of singing drifted through the heavy night like a fragile thread. Adrian Caldwell froze on the staircase, his heart pulled back by the strange melody. For 6 long months, this mansion had known only cries, the weary sighs of doctors, and the hurried footsteps of nurses. But now, the voice was tender, trembling yet warm, like silk laid gently over wounds left open too long. He followed the sound down the hall. A door was left ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling through. Holding his breath, Adrian pushed it open, and the sight before him shook his entire world. On the great bed set at the center of 6 cribs, a young woman lay on her side, her light brown hair spread around her like a halo. Around her, the 6 infants lay in peace for the first time in months. Their breathing was steady, their faces finely calm. Lily's hand rested on her arm, James nestled against her waist, the others scattered around her like petals circling a single stem. It was Elena Ruiz, the maid who had joined less than 2 months ago. To Adrian, she had been nothing more than another nameless employee among the staff who kept the estate running. Yet she had done what doctors, nurses, and specialists had all failed to do. She had brought rest to 6 fragile souls. Even in sleep, a faint smile lingered on Elena's lips, as though she herself knew she had created a miracle. Adrian stood speechless. He had signed billion-dollar contracts, shifted markets with a single decision. But now he trembled at the sight of a 24-year-old maid. In his chest, relief warred with disbelief. He whispered inwardly, "This is only chance." But his eyes would not leave the scene. He did not know how long he stood there. Only that for the first time in half a year, there was no crying, only silence that felt like grace. The truth was undeniable. Money had bought nothing. Yet this overlooked girl had succeeded. As he turned, Adrian caught the stare of Margaret Hale. The housekeeper stood at the end of the hall, her eyes glinting with something unreadable, surprise tinged with envy. She understood instantly that the balance of the household was shifting. A maid had claimed the children's peace, and perhaps Adrian's heart. That night, for the first time in months, Adrian slept for a few hours. Brief, but unlike the restless nights before, morning came. Sunlight spilling across the tall glass windows. Adrian woke with Elena's image still imprinted in his mind, lying surrounded by the children. Yet when he dressed in his suit, he forced his face into its usual mask of cold control. He told himself order must return. He was master here, and the rules would be his. At 8 o'clock, the gathering bell rang in the grand hall. All staff lined up in silence. Adrian appeared on the staircase, his voice echoing. Last night, something occurred outside of regulation. Someone did what was not their responsibility. The air froze. Margaret stood beside him, lips curling faintly, as if waiting for another to fall. Adrian's gaze swept the line and stopped at the end. Elena bowed her head, her hands clasped in front of her plain blue uniform. He asked who she was. She raised her head, her voice trembling but clear. "I am Elena Ruiz, sir. The new maid." Her amber-brown eyes shone with warmth that made his heart skip. But he forced himself not to falter. "You were hired to clean, not to play mother," Adrian said, his tone cold as a blade. Silence thickened. Elena's face paled, her head bowed. Margaret looked on with satisfaction. But within Adrian, conflict churned. The very girl he had just reprimanded was the only one who had brought peace to his children. He ended firmly. "This is a warning. If you cross the line again, you will be dismissed." Elena whispered, "Yes, sir." A single tear fell, yet she stood with strange composure. The staff dispersed. Margaret leaned closer and murmured, "You did the right thing. In this house, everyone must know their place." Adrian nodded, but his eyes betrayed him, still following the small figure as she walked away. Deep within, a question burned. Why had that maid accomplished what no one else could? And he knew that question would haunt him for a very long time. The grand hall of the Caldwell estate after the morning assembly seemed quiet. Yet within its heavy walls, undercurrents swelled. Elena Ruiz silently scrubbed the floors, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night. Being reprimanded before the entire staff was a humiliation that stung deeply. Yet in her heart, the image of 6 children sleeping peacefully for the first time in months still burned bright. That moment, no matter the cost, she would never regret. Upstairs in his office, Adrian Caldwell sat before a desk piled with contracts. Numbers that once meant everything now shimmered on paper without weight. His mind remained trapped in last night's nursery, Lily's eyes as she reached for Elena, James's steady breathing as he pressed close to her. Adrian refused to admit the truth, that he had trembled because of a maid. Yet that truth clung to him more fiercely than any business deal. The door creaked open. Margaret Hale entered carrying a silver tray of tea. She set it down gently, her voice even. "You did the right thing this morning. Without boundaries, this house would collapse into chaos." Adrian looked up. In her eyes was not only loyalty hardened by years of service, but also a hidden ambition. "New staff," she continued, "always think a stroke of luck is enough to rise above. Elena Ruiz is no different." Adrian remained silent, stirring his cup. But Margaret, shrewd as ever, noticed the flicker in his gaze. She lowered her voice, pressing each word. "Mr. Caldwell, I know grief for your wife has left you vulnerable. But remember, the kindness of a maid cannot replace the love of a mother." The words landed heavy as stone. Adrian's green eyes flashed cold. Margaret did not waver. For years she had waited, nurturing hope that she would be the one Adrian leaned on. If Elena was not stopped, that dream would crumble. Meanwhile, Elena was in the library downstairs, her calloused hands trembling as she dusted the shelves. The words from that morning cut into her mind like knives. She asked herself if it had been wrong to hold the children, to sing them to sleep. Yet when she remembered their calm, her heart steadied. She did not regret it. Footsteps echoed. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her presence like a shadow. "Miss Ruiz," she said coldly, "let me remind you. You are only a maid. Cleaning, scrubbing, nothing more. Do not imagine that one night has made you into something else." Elena gripped the cloth until it wrinkled. "I could not leave 6 children crying themselves breathless, madam. The nurses had gone for medicine. I did only what any human being would do." Margaret's mouth curved. A human being should know their limits. "Where do you come from?" An orphan, no family, no standing. If you are wise, you will stay quiet and bow your head. The words struck old wounds. Memories rushed back, taunts in the orphanage, jobs lost for refusing to bend. Elena bit her lip, refusing to answer. Margaret left, the space behind her thick with silence. Elena sank onto a wooden chair, tears spilling. In her heart, she vowed that no matter how much humiliation she endured, she would not let 6 children cry alone again. Night fell. Hallways glowed faint under lamps. Adrian made his rounds. A cry, raw and desperate, tore from the nursery. He pushed the door open. Nurses stumbled, overwhelmed. 6 faces crimson, limbs flailing, screams piercing his chest. A thought struck him. Call for Elena. He knew if she came, peace would return. But then Margaret's voice from that morning echoed, cold as steel. A maid can never replace a mother. Adrian froze. He closed the door, leaving the cries behind him. The shadows of the corridor swallowed him whole. Within him, 2 forces raged. One demanded order. The other longed for the calm that Elena had brought. Adrian understood this was only the beginning. Sooner or later, he would face the truth. Inside this very house, a battle had been ignited, and the adversaries were not only the rivals outside, but the housekeeper of 20 years, and a young maid he could not stop thinking about. 3 days after the public reprimand, the Caldwell estate sank back into its familiar cycle. Nights filled with endless cries, exhausted nurses, and Adrian drifting like a shadow through the halls. The miraculous silence Elena once brought seemed like an illusion. On the 4th night, James's cries rang out different than before, urgent, rapid, full of desperation. Adrian bolted upright and rushed upstairs. Bursting into the nursery, his chest tightened at the sight. James's small body was burning hot, face flushed crimson, breath ragged. A nurse gasped, "Mr. Caldwell, his fever is very high. We called Dr. Patel, but he is at another emergency. It may take an hour before he arrives." Adrian pressed, "What about the fever reducer?" "Already given, but it hasn't worked," came the reply. Adrian lifted James, feeling the scorching heat against his arms. The other infants began to wail, turning the nursery into a chorus of despair. Sweat trickled down Adrian's forehead. In 6 months, he had felt helpless many times, but never had fear struck this violently. Amid the chaos, Elena appeared, a cleaning rag still in her hand. Her eyes widened at the sight of James writhing in Adrian's arms. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, let me try." Normally, Adrian would have refused, but faced with his child gasping for air, instinct compelled him to place James into her arms. She held the boy against her chest, her embrace firm yet tender, then began to sing. Her voice was soft as wind, yet carried astonishing strength. It was an old Spanish lullaby, steeped in motherly warmth. "Arroro mi niño, arroro mi sol." At first, James kicked and whimpered, but each note wrapped around him like a gentle thread pulling him back from panic. His cries weakened, his breathing slowed. His small body softened in Elena's hold. Even more astonishing, the other 5 infants gradually stilled, hiccups fading, eyes following the melody, until they too drifted into sleep. The once frantic nursery fell into sacred quiet. Adrian stood frozen, his throat tight. 6 months of torment had been soothed by the voice of a maid. Elena bent her head and whispered to James, "Sleep, little piece of my heart." Then she lifted her gaze to Adrian. "This is a song I learned in the orphanage. The caretaker used to say lullabies are bridges, carrying the heart to the soul." Adrian did not speak. In Elena he saw not only gentleness, but a power no money or expertise had ever delivered. At that moment, Dr. Patel rushed in, breathless. He examined James, then frowned in disbelief. "The fever is dropping. Remarkable." "What did you do?" Adrian answered quietly, his eyes fixed on Elena. "She did." The doctor looked at her with admiration. It is not always medicine that matters. Sometimes children need connection. This girl, she has an instinct many nurses lack. Elena flushed, lowering her head. "I only cared for younger children in the orphanage. I didn't think it was anything special." In Adrian's heart, emotion mingled with pride and unease. He, a man who once commanded markets, now owed his son's safety to a maid. Yet above all, he felt gratitude. After the doctor left, only Adrian, Elena, and the children remained. James slept soundly in her arms. Adrian started to take him back, but stopped, his voice softened. "Let him stay with you. I want to be certain he rests safely." Elena nodded, sitting in a chair by the crib, her hand patting James's back in steady rhythm. Adrian sat opposite, watching quietly. In that moment, the distance of master and servant dissolved. There was only a father seeing hope, and a young orphan shielding 6 motherless children. His voice was hoarse. "You have a special gift, Elena. The very thing we have searched for these past 6 months." Elena smiled faintly, weary yet sincere. "All they need is love, sir. There is no secret." Adrian knew she was wrong. Not everyone could do what she had done. Tonight, the truth stood clear. The one who could bring peace to the Caldwell family was not a doctor, nor the housekeeper, but the young maid once dismissed. And that truth would change everything. In the days after James's fever broke, the atmosphere inside the Caldwell estate changed. The 6 children were calmer, their cries shorter, their sleep easier, as long as Elena Ruiz was near. Sometimes just the sound of her footsteps in the hall was enough to soothe them. To Adrian, it felt like a miracle. To Margaret Hale, it was a threat. Margaret watched from afar, her cold gray eyes narrowing with vigilance. She had served this house for 20 years, certain she was the only pillar left after Sophia's death. Yet in just a few weeks, a nameless maid had earned the children's trust, and more dangerously, Adrian's attention. At breakfast, Adrian smiled for the first time in months as he saw Lily giggle in Elena's arms. It was a rare smile after endless dark days. Standing behind his chair, Margaret noticed, her lips twitching. She set down his coffee, her tone soft but sharp. "Mr. Caldwell, I fear the children are becoming too dependent on someone without proper training." Adrian looked up, his green eyes flashing. "But they are at peace, Margaret, for the first time in months." "Temporary peace is not a long-term solution," she countered. "A young woman is easily discouraged, easily gone. If she leaves, the children will suffer an even greater shock." Adrian said nothing, but his heart stirred. Margaret was not wrong. The loss of Sophia was a wound that had never healed, and he did not want his children to feel abandoned again. Yet he also knew that without Elena, the household would fall back into nights of torment. One afternoon in the library, Adrian found Elena arranging books. She stood on a ladder, hair falling loose across her brow, her face tilted in the light from the window. A simple picture that stopped him where he stood. "Miss Ruiz," he called. Elena startled, nearly slipping from the rung. Adrian rushed forward, catching her arms. For a moment they were silent, his hand steadying her slender frame. He released her quickly, clearing his throat. "I have something to discuss." She smoothed her uniform nervously. "Yes, sir? The children clearly need you. But I worry it is too much. This was never in your contract. Tell me honestly, do you feel burdened? Elena met his gaze, her brown eyes unwavering. No, sir. I grew up in an orphanage, caring for younger children. Being near them is not a burden. It feels like what I was meant to do. Her words echoed inside Adrian. He had always believed love required conditions. Yet with her, it was as natural as breathing. But he hesitated. If one day you left, what would happen to them? Elena smiled faintly, tinged with sadness. You believe I would abandon them? I have nowhere else. All I want is to be of use. I will not use the children's affection as a bargain. Adrian's chest tightened. He realized he had repeated Margaret's doubts. Shame crept in, but he only said softly, "Forgive me." Their conversation did not escape Margaret. She had watched from the corridor, her eyes narrowing. Jealousy flared inside her like fire. She could not allow a young maid to take the place she had waited decades for. That evening, when the staff retired, Margaret stood before her mirror. Her face was rigid, marked by years. She whispered, "No one will take what is mine." In her mind, pieces of a plan began to fall into place, gears turning silently. The following night, Adrian heard the cries from the nursery. He paused at the door, torn. In his mind, two voices clashed. Margaret's, warning of the danger of dependency, and Elena's, softly affirming love without condition. At last, he pushed the door open. And there it was. As soon as Elena entered, the room calmed. He watched her cradle each child, her hands steady, her eyes full of warmth. The truth was undeniable. The peace of his 6 little angels was bound to the presence of this orphaned girl. Adrian knew he too was being drawn into that pull. And in the shadows, Margaret was waiting for her moment to strike. Late afternoon sunlight spilled across the Caldwell gardens, streaking the tall windows with ribbons of gold. In the library, Adrian Caldwell stood silently before the shelves, his green eyes fixed on the page of a book, though his thoughts wandered far away. Caught in the memory of a sound that had begun to haunt him, the tender singing voice of Elena Ruiz. A ripple of children's laughter floated down the hallway, pulling him back to the present. He moved toward it, careful, quiet. Through the half-open door, he saw Elena seated on a soft rug. 6 small children gathered around her. She sang softly, her hands moving in rhythm. The little ones, who had once known only endless crying, now gazed up at her with wide eyes, their faces alight with innocent wonder. Adrian froze in the doorway. Since Sophia's death, he had believed that warmth would never return to this house. Yet here it was, reborn in the simplest way, not from luxury or power, but from the presence of a young orphaned maid. Elena was not radiant in the way Sophia had been, yet she carried something rarer, a quiet strength that brought absolute peace. When the nurses came to take the children to bed, Elena turned and caught sight of him. She startled, lowering her head. "Forgive me, sir. I did not know you were there." Adrian shook his head. "No forgiveness needed. I only wanted to speak with you." They sat together at the old wooden table. A single lamp cast a warm circle of light around them. Adrian studied her face and wondered why, in her presence, he felt a calm he had not known for months. "Miss Ruiz," he began, "how do you know how to soothe them as you do?" Elena's brown eyes softened as she sank into memory. "I grew up at St. Mary's Orphanage. From the time I was 3 until I turned 18, it was all I knew of home. I cared for the younger children there. When they cried, I sang. It was the only gift I had to give." Her words were quiet and steady. Adrian's chest tightened. He had grown up with everything, never knowing lack. Yet before him sat a woman who once had nothing and still had preserved her gentleness. "Your parents?" he asked softly. Elena shook her head, a strand of brown hair falling across her brow. "I never knew them. There was a caretaker, Carmen, who often said God places orphans there so they may learn to care for the souls of others. She believed it was my calling." Adrian's thoughts swirled. Elena, who had endured rejection and hardship, believed love itself was her mission. He remembered Sophia's voice from long ago, telling him that true strength was not found in power, but in a heart that listens. Elena smiled faintly, tinged with sorrow. "Perhaps that is why I cannot stand still when the children cry. It feels like instinct." Adrian gazed at her, realizing the resilience hidden in her fragile frame. She had so little in the eyes of the world, yet what she carried was beyond price: unconditional love. The room grew still. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. Finally, Adrian spoke, his voice low but firm. "Miss Ruiz, do you ever think you deserve more than this? A true home, a family of your own?" Elena blinked, taken aback, then gave a small, wistful smile. "I do not dare dream of such things. For someone like me, even steady work is already a blessing." "You are wrong," Adrian replied. His voice carried certainty. "You deserve far more. For the peace you bring, you deserve more than anyone I know." Their eyes met. Elena's heart raced. She knew she must not let hope take root. The divide between them was too great. He was master of an empire. She was only a maid. And yet his words burned inside her, bringing tears to her eyes. A sudden knock broke the moment. The door opened and Margaret Hale entered, her eyes sharp as steel. She saw them seated together in the glow of the lamp, and fury flared in her gaze. "Elena," she said coldly, "the children are awake. You should return to them." Elena rose quickly, bowed, and slipped away, her figure fading into the dark corridor. The library was left in tense silence. Margaret turned to Adrian, her voice controlled but seething. "Mr. Caldwell, you must remember the place of every person in this house. Do not let illusions cloud your judgment." Adrian held her stare, his expression hard, but inside him a flame had been lit. Elena's voice, her presence, her compassion, had cracked the walls of ice he had built around himself. And that flame, small though it was, now burned stubbornly, refusing to die, no matter how cold the winds Margaret sent against it. 3 days passed after the conversation in the library, and the atmosphere inside the Caldwell estate grew heavier than ever. The 6 children clung to Elena so fiercely that whenever she was absent, they cried. For Adrian, this was both comfort and hidden worry. For Margaret Hale, it was a warning. She understood that if she did not act, the place she had guarded for 20 years would be erased by a nameless maid. One morning, Adrian had just begun to sign a stack of documents when the door to his office swung open. Margaret entered carrying a thick envelope, her eyes glowing with triumph. "Mr. Caldwell," she said with a voice laced in false regret, "I fear you must know the truth about that girl. For the sake of your family." Adrian looked up, his green eyes sharp as ice. "What truth?" Margaret set the envelope down and pushed it toward him. "I used my contacts to investigate Elena Ruiz's past. The results are not flattering. Inside were copies of papers, vague statements arranged like a prosecutor's file." Adrian read quickly, his heart sinking. The words accused Elena of being expelled from the orphanage at 16 for inappropriate conduct with a male staff member. and suggested she had been dismissed from 3 other households for causing trouble with the masters. Adrian placed the pages down, his expression dark. "Are you certain this is fact?" Margaret tilted her head, her voice dripping like honey mixed with poison. "Documents do not lie. I only wish to save you from being blinded by a gentle facade." At that moment, a faint sound came from the hallway. Elena appeared, her arms full of freshly laundered linens. Hearing her name, she froze. Her eyes met Adrian's before shifting to the papers on the desk. In a flash, she understood. Margaret spun, her tone sharp. "How convenient, you arrived just in time. Now tell us, what explanation do you have for Mr. Caldwell?" Elena laid the linens down on a chair, her hands clenched tight. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned. "Sir, what she says is not the truth." Adrian's voice was steady but low. "Then give me the truth." Elena drew a breath, her voice trembling yet clear. "I left the orphanage at 16, not because of misbehavior. The director harassed me. When I resisted, he created a false excuse to throw me out. I had no one to defend me, so I was branded with shame. Later, in other households, men assumed an orphan girl could be used. I refused and was dismissed. They spread rumors to protect themselves. That is all." Her voice cracked, but not a single tear fell. "I have never done anything shameful. I only wanted to live honestly." The room grew still. Margaret folded her arms with a sneer. "You see, there is always an excuse. There is always an, but the past speaks for itself." Adrian turned sharply, his gaze cutting like a blade. "The past or lies? I have seen her soothe my children, hold them when they were ill, bring them peace no doctor could give. That is the only truth I trust." Margaret flinched. For the first time in 20 years, she heard Adrian's voice turned against her. He rose slowly, each step heavy. "Margaret, you have served this family for many years, and I respect that. But if you think I will cast aside a girl smeared by rumor when I have witnessed her worth with my own eyes, you are mistaken." Elena stood stunned. She had never expected Adrian to defend her so openly. Warmth spread through her chest, dissolving the sting of humiliation. Margaret tried to recover, her voice edged with bitterness. "Mr. Caldwell, I only care for this family." Adrian cut her off. "Care for this family or care for your position?" The question sliced deep. Margaret's face tightened, her lips pressed thin. She lowered her head, but a spark of fury glimmered in her eyes. Elena bent to pick up the linens, her voice soft. "Thank you for believing me." Adrian's gaze softened, his words low enough for her alone. "I believe what I see, Elena. Do not let anyone make you forget who you are." She left quietly, her small figure fading down the hall, her heart heavy with emotions she had never known. Adrian watched her go, aware that his choice had set the house on a new course. On one side, fragile truth. On the other, schemes waiting to consume. And the real battle had only just begun. A winter afternoon draped Newport Beach in gray skies, the Caldwell estate glowing against the gloom. Yet inside the walls, the air was tight as a drawn bowstring. Since the confrontation, Margaret Hale had fallen into an unnatural silence. She no longer openly criticized Elena Ruiz, but in her eyes burned a flame of hatred. Adrian Caldwell had done the opposite, allowing Elena to care for the children more openly, despite suspicious glances. That change alone told Margaret she must act. That day, Elena was assigned to clean Adrian's private chambers, a room she seldom entered. It was vast and opulent. Red velvet drapes falling heavy, ebony wood furniture polished to a shine, a grand bed laid with immaculate linen. Upon the dressing table rested a small velvet box. Inside was a priceless heirloom, the sapphire and diamond hairpin Sophia had worn on her wedding day. Adrian guarded it like a sacred relic, symbol of love and family. Elena bent to wipe the table, her sleeve brushing the box. The hairpin fell to the marble floor with a sharp crack. Her heart lurched as she knelt to recover it. A fastening pin had snapped, and worse, a small diamond had rolled under the bed. "No, this cannot be," she whispered, trembling as she searched. At that moment, the door opened. Margaret stood there, eyes gleaming like a predator scenting blood. "Heavens above!" she cried theatrically. "What have you done, Ruiz?" Elena scrambled to her feet, pale, clutching the damaged hairpin. It was an accident. "I never meant I will find the stone." Margaret advanced, her voice cold. "This is the jewel of Lady Sophia. Do you even understand its meaning to Mr. Caldwell? And you dare ruin it?" Before Elena could answer, Adrian's voice cut in from the doorway. He had returned from a meeting, drawn by the commotion. His eyes fell on Elena, clutching the heirloom, Margaret looming with feigned grief. "Elena?" he asked tightly. She turned, eyes shining with tears. "Sir, I was cleaning. My sleeve brushed it. It fell. I swear I did not mean to." Margaret seized the moment, her voice lowered yet pointed. "You see, I walked in to find her holding it. The hairpin is damaged. The diamond is gone." The silence was thick. Adrian held out his hand, and Elena, shaking, placed the trinket in it. He looked at it. Memories of Sophia flooding him, his grip tightening before he exhaled. "This hairpin?" Adrian said slowly. "Sophia wore it on our wedding day. It once belonged to her grandmother. It cannot be replaced." Elena drew a desperate breath. "Please, sir, let me work without pay until I can repair it." Margaret snapped. "Repair? This is an heirloom. A careless maid cannot fathom such value." Adrian lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp. He looked at Margaret long and hard, then turned back to Elena. There was pain in his stare, but also calculation. At last, his voice came rough but steady. "Elena, do you swear this was accident?" Elena raised her chin, her voice clear. "I swear. I would never dishonor the keepsake of your wife." A beat of silence. Then Adrian nodded. "I believe you." Margaret gasped. "Mr. Caldwell." "But," he cut across her firmly, "accidents happen when staff are left alone in rooms filled with valuables. There should have been better safeguards. The responsibility lies with the head of household management." The words landed like a blade. Margaret's face blanched, her lips trembling, but Adrian gave her no chance to argue. He placed the pin back in its box and said quietly, but with weight, "Elena, be more careful next time. Now return to your duties. This matter is finished." Elena bowed, eyes wet, and hurried out. As the door closed, Margaret stood rooted, her hands clenched white with rage. She had thought she would destroy Elena, but Adrian had defended her instead. Elena's steps faltered down the corridor, her body trembling, yet in her chest glowed a light. For the first time, Adrian had not only trusted her, but stood against Margaret in her defense. Danger still loomed, but she knew the bond between herself and the Caldwell family was stronger than ever. In his office, Adrian gazed out at the darkening gardens. He knew his choice would ignite a secret war. Margaret would not yield easily, but he also knew his heart had chosen its side. And that side was Elena Ruiz. Night fell over the Caldwell estate, the sky veiled in gray clouds. Since the incident with the hairpin, the atmosphere in the house had grown more strained than ever. Margaret Hale had kept her silence, but her eyes followed Elena Ruiz like a hawk. Whispers among the staff spread daily, yet Adrian Caldwell chose to ignore them. He knew that trusting Elena had set him against not only his housekeeper, but the very rules he had once imposed. That night, after the 6 children had fallen asleep, Elena walked quietly down the hall. Her heart still pounded at the memory of Adrian defending her openly. Warmth filled her, but so did fear. That trust felt like a fragile thread, ready to snap if Margaret laid another trap. "Miss Ruiz." Adrian's voice came from behind, low and hoarse, yet warm. Elena turned quickly. He stood under the dim light, weary in face, but bright in eyes. "Mr. Nazis," Caldwell. She whispered, bowing slightly. "Come with me," he said simply. They entered the glass-walled room that looked over the garden. Outside, mist clung to the shrubs. The pale moonlight spilled faintly through the tall windows. Silence pressed in, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Adrian stood with his back to the window, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the floor. Elena lingered at the threshold, her hands clasped, uncertain whether to stay or leave. "Tonight, I will say what I should have said long ago," Adrian began, his voice slow, heavy with restraint. "Elena, I have watched every expert fail. Only you have given peace to the children, and to me." Elena's eyes widened. "Sir, I only followed what my heart told me. I never thought—" "No," Adrian interrupted, stepping closer. "You do not understand. I thought I died with Sophia that day. But then you came. Each night, each lullaby, each small smile of the children in your arms, all of it showed me I was still alive. Elena, I love you." His confession fell like thunder breaking silence. Elena staggered back, her heart stopping. You cannot say that. I am only a maid. You are the master. The distance between us is too great." Adrian moved nearer, his green eyes blazing with a rare sincerity. I know the gulf between us. I know what Margaret and others will say. But I cannot deny it anymore. I tried to keep my distance, to believe it was only gratitude. But each time I saw you holding the children, I longed for that to be ours. Not only father and child, but a family. With you. Elena trembled, tears rising though she held them back. "Mr. Caldwell, please. If the rumors spread, if the children grow and hear of this, they will think I used you. I could not bear that." Adrian raised her chin, his gaze locking deep into hers. "Look into my eyes, Elena. Do you love me?" She froze, her heart hammering. Margaret's warnings, the world's judgment, all collided in her mind. Yet in that instant, in the piercing green eyes before her, strong yet vulnerable, she could not lie. Her voice broke. "I love you. But I am afraid. Afraid I'm not enough. Afraid the world will tear us apart." Adrian smiled faintly, determined. He bent and kissed her, at first gentle, then deep, as though erasing every boundary between them. Elena shook, then yielded, letting her heart lead her. When they parted, both were breathless. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "This feels wrong, but it also feels right." Adrian drew her close, murmuring at her ear, "We will face it together. I will not leave you alone. You are the one I choose, and I will protect you against everything." Out in the hallway, a shadow lingered. Margaret Hale. Her eyes burned with hatred, her fists clenched tight. She had waited too many years for Adrian, and now it was all dissolving because of an orphan girl. Inside the glass room, Adrian and Elena stood close, their hearts beating as one. They did not know that outside, the true storm was only beginning. Margaret had decided, if she could not keep Adrian, she would destroy everything. Winter settled over Newport Beach, draping the sky in a cold mist. The Caldwell estate glowed with light. But for the first time in many months, the sound of children crying no longer echoed through the halls. The 6 little ones slept peacefully, leaving behind a rare silence. Within that silence, Adrian Caldwell stood at the window, listening to faint laughter from the nursery. He descended the stairs and stopped at the sight before him. Elena Ruiz sat on the carpet, Lily nestled in her arms, James clutching at her dress, while the others toddled and cooed like young birds. The image struck his heart with both ache and sweetness. For 6 months, Adrian had believed this house had lost all traces of life. Yet before his eyes, a new home was being built. "They have never laughed so much," Adrian said softly. Elena looked up, her eyes startled. "They are growing, sir. That is all." Adrian smiled faintly. He longed to tell her that she was the reason, but he held it back. Not yet. Across the room, Margaret Hale observed in silence, her face carved with frost. 20 years of loyalty had convinced her that Adrian would one day turn to her. But now her place was threatened by a young girl. Her silence was not surrender. It was the beginning of a storm. Later that afternoon, as Elena walked down a quiet corridor, Margaret stepped into her path. Her voice was low, sharp as a blade. "Do you think you have won his trust? Do not fool yourself. One day Mr. Caldwell will see you for what you are, someone who preys on his pity." Elena gripped the cleaning cloth in her hands, answering quietly but firmly, "I am not here to win anything. I only want the children to be at peace." Margaret stiffened. The words, simple and true, cut at her pride. She turned away, but in her eyes flickered malice. That night, Adrian returned to the nursery. He paused at the sight. Elena sat in an armchair with Arya asleep in her arms, while the others dozed soundly around the large bed. The soft lamp cast its glow across her weary, yet serene face. Adrian stepped closer and spoke in a low voice. "I had forgotten what peace looked like, until you brought it back." Elena started, trying to rise, but he motioned her to stay. He sat opposite, his gaze tender. "Elena, we cannot pretend anymore. I do not only need you for the children, I need you for myself. You are the piece this family has been missing." Elena trembled, shaking her head. "Mr. Caldwell, the world outside will not understand. I am only a maid. You are the master. People will call me ambitious, accuse me of using you." I'm afraid Adrian took her hand, holding it firmly. "The only thing I fear is losing you. I lived half a year in darkness, and you are the only one who brought back the light. Let me protect you, no matter what the world says." Tears spilled silently down Elena's cheeks. She knew the road ahead was full of obstacles, yet for the first time she felt not only humility in her heart, but hope. "Do you truly believe I am worthy of that?" she whispered. "Not only do I believe," Adrian replied with certainty, "I know." In that moment, with the children's gentle breaths around them, it felt like the beginning of something new. But in the hall, Margaret stood in the shadows, her eyes glinting. If Adrian dared to claim Elena openly, she would unleash the Caldwell family's secrets she had hoarded for 2 decades. Secrets powerful enough to shatter his name and tear apart the fragile love just born. Inside the nursery, Adrian and Elena held on to the moment, believing love and trust could stand against judgment. Adrian whispered, "Tomorrow, I will not hide anymore. I want everyone to know you were part of this family." Elena looked at him, her tears shimmering, and nodded. For the first time in her life, she did not feel lost. At her side was the man who had chosen her, and 6 little angels who needed them both. The wind howled against the windows like a warning. A new family had only just begun to blossom, but shadows lurked. Somewhere, Margaret had sworn that if she could not have Adrian, she would drag them all into ruin. Life always tests us with losses and pain that seem impossible to overcome. Adrian Caldwell had everything: wealth, power, and fame. Yet before the cries of his 6 children, he was powerless. And it was only when a young woman, overlooked and underestimated, stepped into his home carrying a heart full of love, that light returned to the cold and silent mansion. The story of Adrian and Elena reminds us that true strength is not found in status or riches, but in the ability to love and to give trust. An orphan maid, considered the lowest of the low, became the one who brought what millions of dollars could not buy: peace for the children and new life for a man who thought he had lost everything. Perhaps each of us has witnessed a moment like this, when the smallest act of care has the power to ease the greatest pain. It might be a hand laid gently on a shoulder, a soft lullaby sung in the dark, or simply the gift of sincere presence. These moments are what give life its deepest meaning. If you believe that love and kindness can change destinies, support this story. Press like, subscribe, and share this video with the people you cherish. Who knows, one simple click today may be the spark that warms someone's heart out there. And do not forget to leave a comment. Have you ever lived a moment where compassion changed everything? Share your story, because it might just become the light that guides someone else.